The smell of garlic and fresh basil filled the air as Maya wiped down another table at Romano's Italian restaurant. Her feet ached from standing for 8 hours straight, but she couldn't stop now. The dinner rush was just beginning, and Friday nights were always the busiest. Maya had been working at Romano's for almost 3 years. At 28, she knew every corner of this place like the back of her hand. She could tell which tables would tip well just by watching how customers walked through the door. She knew exactly how long it took the kitchen to prepare each dish, and she definitely knew which customers would treat her like a real person and which ones would barely look at her face. The restaurant tried hard to look fancy. Red velvet curtains hung from tall windows. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over white tablecloths. Fresh flowers sat on every table. But the most beautiful thing in the whole place was the grand piano that sat right in the middle of the dining room. It was a gorgeous black Steinway, polished so perfectly that Maya could see her reflection in it when she walked by. The piano had been there since the restaurant opened 5 years ago. The owner, Mr. Romano, had bought it because he thought live music would make his restaurant feel more special than the other Italian places in downtown. For the first 2 years, they had a piano player named Robert who came in every Friday and Saturday night. He was good at what he did. He played smooth jazz and classical pieces that made conversations feel more elegant. Customers loved it. But Robert got a better job at a fancy hotel downtown, and that was 6 months ago. Since then, the beautiful piano just sat there silent and waiting. Maya often looked at that piano during her shifts. Sometimes late at night when she was cleaning up after the last customers left, she would run her fingers along its keys. She never pressed them hard enough to make sound. Mr. Romano had made it clear that the piano was expensive and only trained musicians should touch it. But Maya couldn't help herself. The piano called to her. What Mr. Romano and her co-workers didn't know was that Maya had been playing piano since she was 5 years old. Her grandmother had been a piano teacher, and she had started giving Maya lessons as soon as her little fingers could reach the keys. By age 10, Maya was playing pieces that impressed everyone who heard her. By 15, she was good enough to win competitions. Maya had dreamed of going to music school and becoming a concert pianist. She had even gotten a scholarship to study music at the state university. But life had other plans. When Maya was 18, her parents died in a car accident. Suddenly, she became responsible for her younger brother Jake, who was only 14 at the time. The scholarship money wasn't enough to cover living expenses for both of them. Maya had to make a choice. She could follow her dream of music school, or she could make sure Jake had a stable home and could finish high school. For Maya, there was no choice at all. Jake was more important than any dream, so Maya got a job, waitressing, and put her music dreams on hold. She told herself it would just be temporary. Once Jake graduated and got into college, she could go back to music. But Jake was now 22 and still in college, and Maya was still paying most of his expenses. The temporary job had become her life. She didn't regret her choice. Jake was doing well in school, studying to become an engineer. He would graduate next year and finally be able to support himself. Maya was proud of what he had accomplished. But sometimes, late at night, she wondered what her life would have been like if things had been different. Working at Romano's wasn't terrible. The pay was decent, especially with tips. Mr. Romano was a fair boss who treated his workers with respect. Most of her co-workers were friendly, and some customers were genuinely nice people who made her job enjoyable. But there were other customers who made Maya feel invisible. They would snap their fingers to get her attention instead of saying, "Excuse me." They would talk about her like she wasn't standing right there. They would complain loudly if their food took too long, as if Maya was personally cooking it in the kitchen. The worst ones were the business people who came in for expensive dinners. They wore suits that cost more than Maya made in a month. They ordered the most expensive wines and talked loudly about their deals and money. And they treated the waitstaff like servants from another century. Tonight was going to be one of those nights. Maya could tell because a group of businessmen in expensive suits had just walked through the door. There were 8 of them, all talking loudly and laughing at jokes that probably weren't funny. They looked around the restaurant like they owned the place. "Maya, table 12, called out Lisa, the hostess. She nodded toward the group of businessmen who were now sitting at the large round table near the piano. Lisa gave Maya a look that said good luck because they both knew what this type of group would be like. Maya grabbed her notepad and walked over to table 12. The men barely looked at her when she approached. They were too busy talking about some big business deal they had just closed. Maya stood there for almost a minute before one of them noticed her. "Oh, we have service," said the man in the most expensive-looking suit. He was probably in his 50s with gray hair and a watch that sparkled with diamonds. "We'll need menus, obviously, and bring us your best wine. Actually, bring us 2 bottles. We're celebrating tonight." Maya smiled. Politely, "Congratulations on your celebration. I'll get those menus right away. Would you prefer red wine or white wine?" "Surprise us," said another man, waving his hand dismissively. "Just make sure it's expensive. We don't drink cheap wine." As Maya walked away to get their menus, she heard one of them say, "Did you see how she was staring at us? Probably never seen suits this nice before." The others laughed. Maya had seen plenty of expensive suits. She had also seen plenty of people who thought expensive clothes made them better than everyone else. She took a deep breath and focused on doing her job well. These men would be gone in 2 hours, but she would still need this job tomorrow. She brought them the menus and 2 bottles of the restaurant's most expensive Italian wine. As she opened the first bottle, the men continued their loud conversation about money and business deals. They talked about buying companies and firing employees like they were discussing the weather. "This wine better be worth what you're charging," said the man with the diamond watch when Maya poured his glass. He didn't even look at her when he spoke. "It's one of our most popular selections," Maya replied politely. "The owner imports it directly from a vineyard in Tuscany." "I've been to Tuscany," said another man. "Bought a villa there last year. Cost me more than most people make in 10 years. He laughed like this was the funniest thing in the world. Maya finished pouring the wine and took their dinner orders. They wanted the most expensive items on the menu, of course. As she walked back to the kitchen, she passed the silent piano. For just a moment, she imagined what it would be like to sit down and play something beautiful. Something that would make the whole restaurant stop and listen. But she shook her head and kept walking. She had work to do, and dreams didn't pay the bills. The evening continued like Maya expected. The businessmen got louder as they drank more wine. They talked about their expensive cars and vacation homes. They made jokes about people who had to work for a living, apparently forgetting that everyone serving them was working for a living. Other customers in the restaurant started looking annoyed. The businessmen's voices were carrying across the whole dining room. Maya saw other servers rolling their eyes when they walked past table 12. Even Mr. Romano looked concerned from behind the bar, but Maya kept doing her job. She brought them their appetizers, their main courses, and more wine. She smiled politely when they made rude comments. She nodded when they complained that their food wasn't hot enough, even though it had just come out of the kitchen. As the night went on, Maya noticed the men looking at the piano more and more. During a brief pause in their conversation, one of them pointed at it. "What's with the piano?" he asked Maya when she came to refill their wine glasses. "Don't you people know how to play it?" "We usually have a pianist on weekends," Maya explained, "but he's not available tonight." "That's too bad," said the man with the diamond watch. "A place like this should have proper entertainment, especially when you have important guests like us." Maya just smiled and continued pouring wine. She had learned that the best response to comments like that was no response at all. But the men weren't done talking about the piano. As they finished their main courses, their conversation kept coming back to it. They seemed to find it amusing that such an expensive restaurant couldn't provide live music. "I bet none of the staff here could even play chopsticks," said one of them, laughing. "These people probably don't even know what good music sounds like," said another. Maya felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her expression neutral. She had heard comments like this before. Some customers seemed to think that working as a server meant you couldn't possibly have any other talents or interests. What they didn't know was that Maya could play pieces by Mozart and Chopin that would bring tears to their eyes. She could play jazz standards that would make them stop talking and just listen. She could play classical concertos that required years of training to master, But they would never know that. Because they had already... The businessman ordered dessert and more wine, which meant Maya's shift with them was far from over. By now they had been drinking for over 2 hours, and their voices had gotten even louder. Other customers were starting to look annoyed, and Maya could see Mr. Romano watching the table with concern. "Bring us the chocolate cake," said the man with the diamond watch, whose name Maya had learned was Mr. Davidson. "And make sure it's fresh. I hate stale dessert." Maya nodded and headed to the kitchen. As she waited for the chef to prepare their desserts, she could hear their laughter echoing across the restaurant. They were telling stories about their expensive purchases and making fun of people they considered beneath them. When Maya returned, with a tray of desserts, the conversation had shifted back to the piano. Mr. Davidson was pointing at it and shaking his head. "I still can't believe a place like this doesn't have entertainment," he said loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. "When I take clients out, I expect a certain level of class." "Maybe. They can't find anyone good enough," suggested another man. "It's probably hard to find real talent in a place like this." Maya set down their desserts, trying to ignore the conversation. But Mr. Davidson wasn't done. "Excuse me," he said, snapping his fingers to get Maya's attention. She turned to face him, maintaining her professional smile. "Yes, sir?" "This piano situation is really bothering me," he said, gesturing toward the Steinway. "Don't any of you people know how to play? I mean, how hard can it be?" Maya felt her stomach tighten. "As I mentioned earlier, we usually have a professional pianist, but he's not available tonight." "Professional," Mr. Davidson repeated, laughing. "I bet anyone could sit down and bang out a tune. It's not rocket science." The other men chuckled, and one of them added, "My 8-year-old nephew takes piano lessons. Even he could probably play better than whatever passes for music around here." Maya's hands clenched slightly around her notepad, but she kept her voice steady. "Is there anything else I can get for you, gentlemen?" But Mr. Davidson was just getting started. He had an audience now, and he seemed to be enjoying himself. "You know what would be funny?" he said to his companions. "We should ask one of the staff to play something. I bet it would be hilarious." "That's a great idea," said another man. "Come on, miss," he said, looking at Maya. "Why don't you give it a try? Play us a little song." Maya felt her cheeks burning. "I'm sorry, but I need to focus on serving other customers." "Oh, come on," Mr. Davidson insisted. "Don't be shy. I bet you know Mary had a little lamb or something like that." The whole table erupted in laughter. Maya could feel other customers watching now, some looking embarrassed for her, others just curious about the commotion. "I really should get back to work," Maya said, trying to keep her voice professional. But Mr. Davidson wasn't letting it go. He was clearly drunk now, and he seemed to think this was the funniest idea he'd ever had. "Look, we're paying good money to eat here. The least you could do is provide some entertainment, even if it's amateur hour." One of his friends joined in. "Yeah, give us a show. How bad could it be?" Maya looked around the restaurant. Mr. Romano was busy with other customers and hadn't noticed what was happening. Her co-worker Lisa was at the hostess stand, but she was too far away to help. Maya felt completely alone. "I appreciate the suggestion," Maya said carefully, "but I'm not comfortable playing the piano during my work shift." "Not comfortable?" Mr. Davidson laughed even louder. "Why not? Are you afraid you'll embarrass yourself?" Another man at the table spoke up. "Maybe she doesn't know how to read music. I bet she's never even touched a piano before." Maya felt something snap inside her chest. She had been dealing with rude customers for years, but this felt different. They weren't just being dismissive or demanding. They were actively humiliating her for their own entertainment. "Come on," Mr. Davidson continued, his voice getting louder. "Just play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Even a waitress should be able to handle that, right?" The laughter from their table was attracting more attention now. Maya could see other diners turning to stare. Some looked uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, but no one said anything. Maya's mind raced. Part of her wanted to just walk away and let them think whatever they wanted to think. But another, part of her was tired of being treated like she was stupid or worthless just because she served food for a living. "I'm sure you're doing your best," Mr. Davidson said in a patronizing tone that made Maya's skin crawl. But in my experience, people in service jobs don't usually have much education or talent. No offense, of course. None taken, Maya managed to say, though her voice was tighter than before. The man next to Mr. Davidson leaned back in his chair. You know, this reminds me of that movie where the maid turns out to be secretly brilliant. Except this is real life, so that's probably not going to happen here. More laughter. Maya felt like she was standing in the middle of a spotlight, with everyone watching her humiliation for entertainment. Tell you what, Mr. Davidson said, pulling out his wallet. I'll give you $50 if you sit down at that piano and try to play something. Anything at all. It'll be worth it just for the laughs. Maya stared at him. $50 was a significant amount of money to her. It was almost what she made in tips on a slow night. But the way he was offering it made her feel sick. I don't think that's appropriate, she said quietly. Oh, come on, another man chimed in. $50 just to sit at a piano? That's the easiest money you'll ever make. Unless she's too scared, said Mr. Davidson with a smirk. I guess some people just know their limitations. Maya felt tears threatening to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not cry in front of these men. She would not give them that satisfaction. Maybe we should ask someone else, suggested one of the businessmen. What about that young man over there? He pointed toward Tommy, one of the busboys who was barely 18 years old. No, said Mr. Davidson, still looking at Maya. I want to see what our waitress here can do. She looks like she has hidden talents, don't you think? The way he said, hidden talents, made Maya feel even more uncomfortable. There was something in his tone that went beyond just making fun of her musical abilities. Maya looked at the piano, then back at the table of businessmen. They were all watching her expectantly, like she was some kind of performing animal. The rest of the restaurant was watching too, waiting to see what would happen next. For years, Maya had swallowed her pride and dealt with difficult customers. She had smiled when people were rude to her. She had stayed professional when customers treated her like she was invisible or stupid. She had done it because she needed the job and because she believed that good service meant putting the customer first. But this felt different. This wasn't about bad service or unreasonable demands. This was about a group of drunk men who thought it would be funny to humiliate a working woman for their entertainment. Maya thought about her brother Jake, who was probably studying for exams right now. She thought about the bills she needed to pay and the dreams she had put on hold. She thought about all the times she had walked past that piano and resisted the urge to play. And then she thought about her grandmother, who had taught her to play when she was 5 years old. Her grandmother had always told her that music was a gift and that gifts were meant to be shared with the world. You know what? Maya said, her voice suddenly stronger. You're right. I should play something. Mr. Davidson's eyes lit up with delight. Now we're talking. This is going to be great. Maya untied her apron and folded it neatly. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady. But I need to warn you gentlemen about something. What's that? Asked Mr. Davidson, grinning widely. Maya looked him directly in the eyes. You might not get the show you're expecting. The businessmen exchanged glances and started laughing again. They had no idea what they were about to witness. They thought they were about to watch a waitress embarrass herself at a piano for their amusement. Maya walked slowly toward the piano, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel every eye in the restaurant on her. Some customers looked curious, others looked concerned, and a few looked like they wanted to stop what was about to happen. As she approached the piano bench, Maya's hands stopped shaking. She had performed in front of audiences before, but never like this. Never when the audience was expecting her to fail. She sat down at the bench and adjusted it slightly. The piano was perfectly tuned, just like she had suspected. Mr. Romano took good care of his equipment, even if it wasn't being used. Maya placed her hands on the keys but didn't press down yet. She looked back at table 12, where the businessmen were watching with anticipation and barely contained laughter. What are you going to play? Called out Mr. Davidson. Something we might recognize? Maya smiled for the first time all evening. It wasn't the polite, professional smile she had been wearing all night. This was different. This was the smile of someone who was about to prove a point. "I think you'll recognize it," she said, and then she began to play. Maya's fingers touched the keys, and for a split second the restaurant held its breath. Then she began to play, and the world changed. The first notes were soft and gentle, like a whisper in the darkness. Maya had chosen Rachmaninoff's Piano, Concerto No. 2, one of the most beautiful and challenging pieces ever written. But she didn't start with the dramatic opening that most people knew. Instead, she began with the quiet, haunting melody that came later in the piece. The businessmen at table 12 were still smiling, waiting for the disaster they expected. Mr. Davidson had his phone out, probably planning to record Maya's humiliation. But as the first few measures filled the restaurant, their expressions began to change. This wasn't the amateur fumbling they had anticipated. The notes were clear and precise, flowing from Maya's fingers with the confidence of someone who had played this piece hundreds of times. Her technique was flawless, her touch sensitive and expressive. Maya lost herself in the music. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about bills or responsibilities or difficult customers. She was back in her grandmother's living room, playing piano for the pure joy of making beautiful sounds. She was back in high school, preparing for competitions and dreaming of concert halls. The melody built slowly, gaining complexity and emotion with each phrase. Maya's hands moved across the keys with graceful precision, bringing out the subtle harmonies that made Rachmaninoff's music so powerful. This was music that required not just technical skill, but deep understanding and years of training. Around the restaurant, conversations stopped mid-sentence. The businessman who had been laughing loudest slowly lowered his phone. The woman at table 6 put down her fork and turned to watch. The elderly couple near the window stopped talking about their grandchildren and listened with wonder. Maya transitioned into the more dramatic section of the concerto, her left hand providing a rich bass foundation while her right hand soared through the passionate melody. This was the part of the piece that could bring audiences to tears, the part that separated true musicians from people who just knew how to press keys. Mr. Romano emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the sound. He had owned this restaurant for 5 years and had heard Robert play many times, but this was something different. This was professional-level artistry happening in his dining room. The busboy Tommy stopped clearing tables and stood frozen, holding a stack of plates. Lisa, the hostess, stood by her station with her mouth slightly open. The kitchen staff had gathered in the doorway, all watching Maya with expressions of amazement. But Maya was aware of none of this. She was completely absorbed in the music, letting years of suppressed passion flow through her fingers onto the keys. This piece had been one of her favorites in high school. She had dreamed of playing it with a full orchestra someday. Tonight she was playing it solo, but it felt just as powerful. The businessmen at table 12 were no longer laughing. Mr. Davidson's expression had gone from amused expectation to confusion to something approaching shock. The man next to him was leaning forward in his chair, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Maya's technique was becoming more apparent with each passing measure. Her hands crossed and uncrossed with fluid grace. Her fingers moved with the speed and precision that only came from years of serious study. She was using advanced techniques like rapid octave passages and complex arpeggios that most amateur players could never attempt. As she reached the climax of the piece, Maya's whole body became involved in the performance. Her shoulders swayed, slightly with the rhythm. Her face reflected the emotions in the music, sometimes peaceful, sometimes intense. This wasn't just someone playing notes on a piano. This was an artist interpreting a masterpiece. The sound filled every corner of the restaurant. The Steinway's rich tone carried the music perfectly, its powerful bass notes resonating through the floor while the treble notes sparkled like crystal. Maya had forgotten how good it felt to play on a quality instrument, how responsive the keys were under her fingers. Other diners began to realize they were witnessing something special. Phones came out not to mock, but to capture this unexpected moment of beauty. A woman at table 8 wiped tears from her eyes. The elderly man near the window reached across the table to hold his wife's hand. Maya moved into a softer section of the piece, her touch becoming gentle and intimate. This was the part that always reminded her of her grandmother, who had taught her that music wasn't just about hitting the right notes at the right time. It was about telling a story, about sharing emotions that words couldn't express. The businessmen were completely silent now. Mr. Davidson had put his phone away and was staring at Maya with an expression she couldn't quite read. Was it embarrassment? Shame? Or just the shock of realizing how badly he had misjudged the situation? Maya built toward the final climax of the piece, her hands flying across the keyboard in passages that required not just skill, but complete confidence. She played cascading runs that sounded like waterfalls of notes, each one crystal clear and perfectly placed. Her left hand provided thunderous bass notes that seemed to shake the chandeliers. This was the moment when Maya's years of training showed most clearly. The piece demanded everything a pianist could give: speed, power, delicacy, and emotional depth all at the same time. Most people who had taken a few piano lessons couldn't even dream of attempting music like this. The entire restaurant was transfixed. Servers had stopped working to listen. Customers had forgotten about their meals. Even the background noise from the kitchen had quieted as everyone strained to hear every note. Maya reached the final section of the piece, where the main melody returned one last time, transformed and elevated by everything that had come before. She played it with deep feeling, each note weighted with emotion. This was her chance to show not just technical skill but artistry. As she approached the ending, Maya allowed herself to look up briefly. The sight that greeted her was something she had never expected. Every person in the restaurant was watching her, and their faces showed not mockery or condescension, but genuine appreciation and respect. The businessman who had made the crack about his nephew taking piano lessons was shaking his head slowly, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. The man who had suggested she play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star was sitting with his mouth slightly open. But it was Mr. Davidson's expression that struck Maya most. The arrogant confidence was completely gone, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. He was no longer the man who had been making jokes about waitresses and their supposed lack of talent. He was someone who had just realized how badly he had underestimated another human being. Maya played the final chords of the piece, letting each note ring out clearly before gently lifting her hands from the keys. The silence that followed was profound and complete. Not a glass clinked, not a chair moved, not a whisper was heard. For a moment that seemed to last forever. The restaurant existed in perfect stillness. Maya sat at the piano bench, her hands resting in her lap, suddenly aware of what she had just done. She had revealed herself in a way she hadn't planned, showing these strangers a part of her soul that she usually kept hidden. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. It was the elderly woman near the window, her face wet with tears. The sound of her applause broke the spell, and suddenly the entire restaurant erupted in thunderous applause. People stood up from their tables, applauding with genuine enthusiasm. The kitchen staff emerged completely, adding their voices to the appreciation. Mr. Romano was clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. Even Tommy the busboy was cheering. But Maya's eyes went to table 12, where the 8 businessmen sat in various states of shock and embarrassment. Mr. Davidson was clapping, but slowly and mechanically, as if he couldn't quite process what had just happened. Maya stood up from the piano bench, her legs slightly unsteady. The applause continued for what felt like several minutes, wave after wave of appreciation from people who had expected to witness a humiliation, and instead had experienced something beautiful. As the applause finally began to die down, Maya realized that something fundamental had changed in that restaurant. She was no longer just the waitress who brought food and drinks. She was no longer invisible or insignificant in the eyes of these people. She was a musician. She was an artist. And everyone in that room now knew it. The question was, what would happen next? The applause seemed to go on forever, but eventually it began to fade. Maya stood beside the piano, suddenly aware that dozens of people were staring at her with expressions of amazement and respect. She wasn't sure what to do next. In all her years of dreaming about performing, She had never imagined it would happen like this. Mr. Romano was the first to approach her. The restaurant owner, who had always been kind but professional with his staff, walked over with tears in his eyes. "Maya," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "In 5 years of owning this restaurant, I have never heard anything so beautiful. Where did you learn to play like that?" Before Maya could answer, other people began approaching. The elderly woman who had been the first to clap was making her way over, her husband beside her. "My dear," the woman said, taking Maya's hands in hers, "that was absolutely magnificent. I've been to Carnegie Hall and I've never been more moved by a performance." Maya felt tears threatening again, but this time they were tears of joy rather than humiliation. "Thank you so much, that means everything to me." Other customers lined up to speak with her. A middle-aged man introduced himself as a music teacher at the local high school. A young woman said she was a music student and had never heard Rachmaninoff played so beautifully. An older gentleman mentioned that his late wife had been a classical music lover, and Maya's performance had reminded him of her. But through all of this, Maya was aware of the table of businessmen sitting in uncomfortable silence. She could see them out of the corner of her eye, having quiet conversations and glancing in her direction. Mr. Davidson looked particularly troubled, fidgeting with his wine glass and avoiding eye contact with everyone around him. After speaking with several customers, Maya realized she needed to get back to work. She still had tables to serve, including table 12. The thought of facing those men after what had just happened made her stomach flutter, but she was a professional. She would do her job. As she approached table 12, the conversation stopped. 8 grown men, successful businessmen who had been loud and confident all evening, suddenly looked like schoolboys who had been caught doing something wrong. "Gentlemen," Maya said, her voice steady and professional, "can I get you anything else this evening?" Mr. Davidson cleared his throat several times before speaking. When he finally found his voice, it was much quieter than it had been all night. "Miss," he began, then stopped and started again. That was—" He seemed unable to finish his sentence. One of his colleagues, a man who had been particularly vocal about making fun of service people, spoke up instead. "That was incredible," he said simply. "I've never heard anything like that in my life." Maya nodded politely. "Thank you. Now, is there anything else I can bring you?" But Mr. Davidson wasn't ready to let her go back to work just yet. He stood up from his chair, which seemed to surprise his companions as much as it did Maya. "Please," he said. "Could you sit down for just a minute? I need to—" Again, he couldn't seem to finish his thoughts. Maya remained standing, unsure of what he wanted. "Look," Mr. Davidson continued, running his hands through his gray hair. "What we did tonight, what I did, it was wrong. It was completely wrong." Maya could see that he was genuinely struggling with his emotions. The arrogant businessman from earlier in the evening was gone, replaced by someone who looked deeply ashamed of himself. "We came in here thinking we were better than everyone else," he continued. "We made assumptions about you, about your intelligence, about your talents. We treated you like I was less than human," Maya finished quietly. Mr. Davidson's face crumpled. "Yes, exactly. And I am so sorry." The other men at the table were nodding in agreement. Some of them looked close to tears themselves. The man who had joked about his nephew taking piano lessons spoke up. "I feel sick about how we behaved," he said. "You're clearly a trained musician. Professionally trained. How long have you been playing?" Maya considered how to answer. Part of her wanted to tell them it was none of their business, but another part of her, the part that had just shared her musical soul with a room full of strangers, felt like honesty was the right choice. "I started when I was 5, she said. "My grandmother was my first teacher. I studied seriously through high school and was supposed to go to music school on scholarship." "What happened?" asked another man gently. Maya hesitated. She didn't usually share her personal story with customers, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the normal rules seemed to be suspended. "My parents died when I was 18. she said simply. I had to take care of my younger brother. So I put music school on hold and got a job. The silence at the table was profound. These men who had been joking about people who had to work for a living were confronted with the reality of what that actually meant for someone like Maya. How long have you been working here? Mr. Davidson asked. 3 years. And you've been playing like that for how long? Maya almost smiled. For about 20 years. Another long silence. Finally, one of the businessmen spoke up. We are the biggest idiots who ever lived. This broke some of the tension, and Maya did smile then. You're not idiots. You just made some assumptions. Wrong assumptions, Mr. Davidson said firmly. Terrible assumptions. And I want to make this right somehow. There's nothing to make right, Maya replied. I'm fine, I'm good at my job and I like working here. But you're a concert-level pianist working as a waitress, protested another man. That's not... shouldn't you be performing professionally? Maya had been asked this question many times over the years, usually by people who didn't understand the realities of life and responsibility. Music is a difficult career, she explained. Even very talented musicians often need other jobs to pay the bills, and I have responsibilities that come first. Mr. Davidson leaned forward. What if I told you that some of those responsibilities might be about to change? Maya wasn't sure what he meant by that, but before she could ask, he continued. I own a company that does corporate events, big events with big budgets. We're always looking for quality entertainment. He paused. Would you be interested in performing at some of our functions? Maya blinked in surprise. I'm not sure I understand. I'm offering you work, Mr. Davidson said. Real work as a musician, the kind of work you should have been doing all along. The other men at the table began speaking up as well. One mentioned that his law firm hosted regular client events. Another said his company was planning a major anniversary celebration. A third mentioned that his wife was on the board of the local symphony and was always looking for talented local musicians. Maya felt overwhelmed. In the space of 20 minutes, she had gone from being humiliated to being offered multiple opportunities to perform professionally. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say you'll consider it, Mr. Davidson urged. Please, let us make up for how we treated you tonight. Maya looked around the table at these 8 men who had transformed from arrogant bullies into genuinely remorseful human beings. She thought about her brother Jake, who would graduate college next year. She thought about the music dreams she had put on hold, but never quite abandoned. I'll consider it, she said finally. The relief on their faces was obvious. Mr. Davidson pulled out his business card and handed it to her. Please call me next week, he said. I'm serious about this. We have an event coming up next month and I would be honored to have you perform. As Maya took the business card, she noticed something else. Other customers in the restaurant were also approaching, some with business cards of their own. The music teacher wanted to know if she gave private lessons. The music student asked if Maya would consider being her mentor. A woman mentioned that she was planning her daughter's wedding and was looking for ceremony music. What had started as an evening of humiliation was turning into something Maya had never expected. Opportunity. Mr. Romano appeared at her elbow. Maya, when you have a moment, could I speak with you privately? Maya excused herself from the crowd and followed her boss to a quiet corner of the restaurant. I have a proposition, Mr. Romano said. How would you feel about being our regular pianist? Friday and Saturday nights, maybe Thursday too if business picks up. Full wages plus tips plus you keep any side bookings that come from people hearing you play here. Maya's eyes widened. Are you serious? I've never been more serious about anything, Mr. Romano replied. What you did tonight. You turned my restaurant into something special. People are going to come back just to hear you play. Some are probably going to come for the first time because they hear about you. Maya looked around the restaurant, which was buzzing with excitement and conversation about her performance. She realized that Mr. Romano was probably right. Word would spread about the waitress who played like a concert pianist. People would come to hear her and they would also come to eat at Romano's. I would love that, Maya said. More than you know. As she walked back toward the dining room, Maya caught sight of herself in the mirror behind the bar. She looked the same as she had at the beginning of her shift. Same uniform, same pulled-back hair, same face. But something fundamental had changed. She was no longer just Maya the waitress who happened to be able to play piano. She was Maya the musician who happened to also. 6 months later, Maya barely recognized her own life. As she sat at the same Steinway piano in Romano's, warming up for her Friday evening performance, she thought about how dramatically everything had changed since that night when she had decided to step up to the piano. The restaurant was packed, as it had been every weekend since word had spread about the amazing pianist at Romano's. Mr. Romano had to start taking reservations weeks in advance, and he had hired 2 additional servers to handle the increased business. Maya smiled as she watched the new waitstaff bustling around, remembering when she had been in their position. But Maya was no longer waiting tables. She was Romano's official evening pianist, performing Thursday through Saturday nights to sold-out crowds. The restaurant had become one of the most popular dining destinations in the city, not just for the food, but for the live music that transformed an ordinary dinner into an unforgettable experience. Maya's schedule outside of Romano's was just as busy. True to his word, Mr. Davidson had hired her to perform at his company's monthly client events. The first performance had been so successful that he had offered her a regular contract. Other businesses had followed suit, and Maya now had a steady stream of corporate bookings. But the most meaningful change had been the establishment of Maya's music studio. She had rented a small space 2 blocks from Romano's and was now teaching piano to 12 regular students. Some were children just starting their musical journey. Others were adults who had always wanted to learn. Each lesson reminded Maya why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. Her brother Jake had been the most surprised by her transformation. When Maya had called to tell him about that first night at the piano, he had been amazed. "I knew you were good," he had said. "But I had no idea you were that good. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Maya had explained that she hadn't wanted Jake to feel guilty about the sacrifices she had made, but Jake had surprised her with his response. "Maya, I'm graduating in 6 months," he had said. "I've got a job lined up with an engineering firm. You don't need to take care of me anymore. It's time for you to take care of your dreams." That conversation had given Maya the courage to make the changes she had been afraid to make for years. She had reduced her waitressing shifts and gradually built up her music career. Now 6 months later, she was earning more money as a musician than she ever had as a full-time server. Tonight's crowd at Romano's included several familiar faces. The elderly couple who had been so moved by her first performance now came in every Friday night and always requested the same table near the piano. The music teacher from the high school had become a friend and sometimes brought his advanced students to hear Maya play. Even some of the businessmen from that first night had become regular customers. Mr. Davidson came in monthly with different clients, and he always made sure to introduce them to Maya. The man who had joked about his nephew taking piano lessons had actually brought his nephew to hear Maya play, and the 8-year-old was now one of her piano students. But the most significant change wasn't in Maya's career or her income. It was in how she saw herself and how others saw her. She was no longer invisible, no longer just part of the background of other people's lives. She was Maya Chen, the pianist. She was an artist, a teacher, a performer. She mattered. As Maya finished her warm-up scales, she noticed a familiar face in the crowd. Dr. Catherine Walsh, the music director from the State University, was sitting at a table near the window. Maya had met her the previous month at a classical music society event, and they had talked about Maya's background and training. Dr. Walsh had mentioned that the university was always looking for adjunct instructors, especially ones with real-world performance experience. She had given Maya her card and suggested they talk about the possibility of Maya teaching a class or 2 at the university level. The idea both thrilled and terrified Maya. Teaching at the university would be a dream come true, a chance to share her love of music with serious students who were pursuing their own musical careers. It would also be a form of validation that she had never expected to receive. As Maya began her first set of the evening with a gentle Chopin nocturne, She reflected on the courage it had taken to get to this point. That night, 6 months ago, stepping up to the piano had required every ounce of bravery she possessed, but each performance since then had made her stronger and more confident. The audience at Romano's listened with the kind of respectful attention that serious music deserved. This wasn't background music for their conversations. This was the main event, the reason many of them had come. Maya had learned to read her audience, to choose pieces that would move them, challenge them, and leave them wanting more. Tonight, she had planned a program that would showcase different aspects of her musical abilities. After the Chopin, she moved into a jazzy interpretation of a Broadway standard, then transitioned to a powerful piece by Liszt that allowed her to demonstrate her technical skills. Between pieces, Maya spoke briefly to the audience, sharing stories about the composers or explaining what had drawn her to particular pieces. This connection with her listeners had become one of her favorite parts of performing. She was no longer the invisible server bringing food to tables. She was an artist sharing her passion with people who appreciated it. During her break between sets, Dr. Walsh approached the piano. "Maya, that was wonderful as always," she said. "I wanted to follow up on our conversation about teaching. Would you be interested in coming to the university next week to meet with our faculty? We have an opening for someone to teach our advanced piano performance class." Maya's heart raced. Teaching at the university would mean working with students who were as passionate about music as she was. It would mean being part of an academic community that valued artistic excellence. It would mean that her journey from waitress to pianist was truly complete. "I would be very interested," Maya replied. "Thank you for thinking of me." As Dr. Walsh walked back to her table, Maya caught sight of herself in the mirror behind the bar. She was wearing a simple black dress appropriate for performance, her hair styled elegantly. She looked professional, confident, like someone who belonged on a concert stage. But more importantly, she felt like someone who belonged there. The transformation wasn't just external. Maya had rediscovered the part of herself that she had hidden away for so many years. She had remembered what it felt like to be an artist, to have something important to share with the world. For her second set, Maya chose pieces that told the story of her journey. She began with the Rachmaninoff concerto that she had played on that first night, the piece that had started everything. As she played, she thought about the scared waitress who had sat down at this same piano 6 months ago, not knowing that her life was about to change forever. Then she played a piece by Bach that her grandmother had taught her when she was 12. It was a piece about finding beauty in simplicity, about the importance of staying true to yourself even when the world tries to change you. She ended with a composition of her own, something she had written during the past few months as she processed everything that had happened to her. It was a piece about transformation, about the courage required to show the world who you really are. As the final notes faded away, the audience erupted in their usual enthusiastic applause. But tonight felt different to Maya. Tonight felt like a celebration not just of her performance but of her journey. After the show, as Maya was packing up her music, Mr. Romano approached with a big smile on his face. "Maya, I have news," he said. "A reporter from the city newspaper wants to do a feature story about you, about how you've transformed our restaurant and inspired other people to pursue their dreams." Maya was surprised. She had never thought of herself as inspirational. She had just been trying to make the best of her situation. "What would the story focus on?" she asked. "On how one moment of courage can change everything," Mr. Romano replied. "On how talent exists in unexpected places and how we should never underestimate the people around us." Maya thought about the businessmen from that first night who had learned that lesson the hard way. She thought about all the servers and kitchen workers and hotel housekeepers and retail clerks who might have hidden talents and deferred dreams. She thought about how many people might be afraid to show the world who they really were. "I'll do the interview," she decided. "If my story can encourage even one person to pursue their dreams, it will be worth it." As Maya walked home that night, she passed the music store where she had bought her first piece of sheet music with her own money years ago. In the window was a poster advertising piano lessons with a photo of a smiling woman at a piano. Maya realized with a start that it was Her own advertisement, the one she had placed when she first started teaching. Maya Chen, professional pianist and instructor, the poster read, bringing the joy of music to students of all ages. Maya smiled. 6 months ago, she would have been amazed to see her name described as a professional pianist. Now it felt completely natural, because that's what she was. That's what she had always been, even when she was serving tables and hiding her talent from the world. The next morning, Maya woke up early to practice before her first piano.